Beloved community, this is our third and final session for What Mary Knew by Heart. Hello, hello from Philadelphia. We have been gathering virtually for the past 3 weeks from over 30 countries around the world, which is very exciting. Hello, Dawn from Michigan. So this third session is a culmination of all of the work that we've been doing. And the emphasis is going to be on being able to know from our heart, being able to practice what I believe Mary practiced and that Christ taught her how to practice. Which is a way of existing intensely from within, existing intensely in a way where we are connected, not just to our own individual lives and this one life, but all the love that has inspired us and led us, often unconsciously, but all the love that has been guiding us and has been with us from within us all along. So we are going to, for those of you, because we have many who like to read along, we're going to be reading from the Gospel of John, and my preference is a New Testament, which is, it's now in paperback as well. This was translated by and edited by a team that a professor of mine from Union Theological Seminary, Hal Talsig, brought together. Hal is the one who introduced me to the Gospel of Mary and the Acts of Paul and Thecla. So he is a beloved of mine. And this compilation is so powerful for me as a scholar, because this is the reintegration of all of those gospels that were edited out in the 4th century. The gospels, like the Gospel of Philip, which actually is not in this, and I've reached out to Hal Talsig about why, and they had to go through an editing process to pick the gospels that were the most inclusive and were actually the most radical in terms of women's position of spiritual authority, the proof of their spiritual authority in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century before the original compilation of the Bible. So this New Testament has scripture like the Acts of Paul and Thecla, the Gospel of Mary, and also Thunder Perfect Mind, which is probably one of the oldest scriptures that we have of the voice of the divine feminine. And that I include several quotes of Thunder Perfect Mind in Mary Magdalene Revealed, because it, as do many of these other texts from the 1st century, it dislodges our dichotomous mind, our ego's desire to want things to be either or, one thing or the other. The Thunder Perfect Mind is about both and. So there's this repetition of, there's a voice that's repeating I am statements, and the I am statements are declaring herself, those things with which we usually hold as opposites. So I am the virgin and I am the whore. And this is a voice that it's dated to the 1st century, but it was most likely an oral text that was then just codified and written down in the 1st century. So it was possibly older than that. But this emphasis of holding the opposites from within, being both and, rather than this sense of either or, is a really profound shift, and is the theme of the Gospel of Mary, where we are both fully human and fully divine, not either or. It's both and fully. 100%. And there's no sense of one being greater or less than the other. So one of the questions that came up a lot over the past several weeks from our community is this understanding of the ego. If it seems like it's like, how do you reconcile the fact that you're going to release the ego and allow the soul to rise, or this idea of this egoic death being spiritual bypassing, or if we're releasing the ego, in this lifetime, then that means not feeling things deeply. Like, how do you go deeply into emotions and then also let go of the ego? And after we move through some of this material, I'm going to go into some personal example that I think will really help us move forward with that concept of the ego and the soul. So it's not meant to be one or the other. It's not meant to be either or. It's meant to be both are crucial. And death, of course, as we talked about in the first session, death is in these references, it's not a physical death. So it's not the physical death of the ego. That only happens when the body dies. But this death is in reference to the way in which death is described and understood in Aramaic, which would have been one of the languages Christ spoke, as existing elsewhere. So it's those moments where we're able to go fully into one of those 7 powers, recognize, first of all, awaken to the fact that we're in one of those 7 powers, but then also to be able to then feel it fully, right? The only way out is through. We have to feel something fully. And sometimes that takes years in order to really allow ourselves to enter into a trauma or enter into how deeply we feel about something that happened to us or someone else, the layers and the layers of grief, because healing is not linear. It's a spiral, and we circle back again and again to a trauma until we are at a point where we're ready to feel something fully, all the way back and all the way through. And there's deep wisdom in that. So the idea is to go fully into this human emotion, which we are meant to, because we are fully human. But the opportunity is then to be able to reach a state where we can let go of the story that the ego has created around that trauma, that wound, to free ourselves and whoever else might be involved in that, situation, and releasing it, which is at the heart of the practice that the first century Christians were all practicing, the kenotic path, the self-emptying love. What that means is that in those moments, then you're able to see the ego for what it is. You're able to identify it and recognize it, and then have the choice to release it and to be able to return to a state of love. And the idea then is that the soul rises from within us. The soul is that limitless, unending love, unconditional love that comes ultimately from within us and can overwhelm us in those moments and allow us to return to a state where we have freed ourselves from that suffering that we had been participating in, often necessarily, but that we were ready to release that. And from that release, we're able to turn that suffering into a greater capacity to love, into a greater capacity for empathy, for our other, the other human beings in this world with us, and a greater sense of the power of mercy. So we are going to read from chapter 20 of the Gospel of John, for those of you who want to move to that. And for those of you who have a New Testament, it is on page 214. It's titled The Risen Life. And what I want you to keep in mind as we read this passage, we're going to read verses 1 through 16. I want you to keep in mind what we learned from the first session from the Gospel of Mary, chapter 7, which is about vision. It's about the spiritual eye of the heart, which in Greek is nous. It's about that capacity to be able to see or vision and connect to an aspect of the soul that is possible of being awakened here in this body, in this lifetime, which is that emphasis from the Gospel of Philip to awaken while in this body, for everything exists in it, resurrect in this life. That's the emphasis of the Gospel of Philip. And so I want us to take those two aspects of our previous session and hold that in mind as we begin to read the Gospel of John, because those are missing scriptures from the practice of Christianity, modern Christianity, and from usually the reading and interpretation of the Gospel of John. We're not usually integrating these other texts. And for me, it provides these layers to the Gospel of John when we look at them after having deeply read, especially chapter 7 from the Gospel of Mary, and after we have fully understood from the Gospel of Philip what it means to resurrect in this lifetime, which is, again, a reference to that idea of not the physical death, but of those tiny deaths of our egoic understanding of ourselves, the stories that we create about ourselves that often limit what's possible for us, or create shame and regret, and in some way keep us tethered to the past and keep us from being able to be in the present moment, fully in this present moment. And as we'll see in the Gospel of John, there is a power to just being present. There's a power in being able to resurrect or awaken fully in the heart in this moment. So this is from The Risen Life, page 214 in the New Testament, from the Gospel of John, verse 1. On the first day of the week, early in the morning, while it was still dark, Mary of Magdala went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed. So she came running to Simon Peter and to that other disciple whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken away the master out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." So Peter started off with that other disciple, and they went to the tomb. The two began running together, but the other disciple ran faster than Peter and reached the tomb first. Stooping down, he saw the linen wrappings lying there, but did not go in. Presently, Simon Peter came following behind him and went into the tomb. And he looked at the linen wrappings lying there, and the cloth which had been on Jesus's head, not lying with the wrappings, but rolled up to one side separately. Then the other disciple who had reached the tomb first went inside too, and he saw for himself and believed. For they did not then understand the writing which says that Jesus must rise again from the dead. The disciples then returned to their companions. And then this portion of it starts with verse 11 about Mary Magdalene. Meanwhile, Mary was standing close outside the tomb, weeping. Still weeping, she leaned forward into the tomb and saw two angels clothed in white, sitting there where the body of Jesus had been lying, one where the head and the other where the feet had been. "Why are you weeping?" asked the angels. "They have taken my master away," she answered, "and I do not know where they have laid him." After saying this, she turned around and looked at Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was Jesus. "Why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" he asked. Supposing him to be the gardener, Mary answered, "If it was you, sir, who carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away myself." Then in verse 16, "Mary," said Jesus. She turned around and exclaimed in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which is to say, teacher. So let's begin with verse 1, which is this emphasis that it's the first day of the week. So it's Sunday, when Mary goes at first alone to the tomb in the dark. I think that this is really powerful for many reasons. Symbolically, the dark is that unknown space, that interstice, that not knowing. And then the dark is also that she was alone, to me signifies her prominence. Now, if we take what we know from the Gospel of Philip, where there's an emphasis that Mary of Magdala was the companion of Jesus of Nazareth, if we know that he loved her more than all the other disciples, he often kissed her on the mouth. If we reintegrate that perspective, that testimony from the Gospel of Philip, and we reintegrate the emphasis of vision from within the heart that we learned from chapter 7 from the Gospel of Mary, we understand the symbolism then of that it's Mary who's there on her own in the dark on the holiest day of the week. It's Mary who's there in her full humanity, right? She's there not praying, not meditating. She is looking for Christ's body. She wants to actually tend to his corporal form. Like she is in her, any one of us who has lost a beloved family member, a beloved friend, no matter how much we're able to stay connected to that person from within the heart, nothing can take away the grief of actually losing the physical presence of someone. So again, the emphasis of the both and. It's not either or. It's not, oh, well, you're going to be able to continue the relationship from within the heart. It's also the devastation of that beloved body that is no longer there. And so it's that acknowledgement of the both and. She loved his physical form as much as she loved and would continue to love his soul. So she's grieving and she's in her full humanity and she is looking for the actual body, human body of Christ. And then I think it's interesting that Peter and the other disciple in verse 9, the Gospel of John said they did not understand the writing which says that Christ must rise from the dead. What's interesting to me is that, again, if we weave in the teachings from the Gospel of Mary and the Gospel of Philip, we can see that Mary had a unique teaching that she was already practicing before this moment, that she was prepared for in order to receive this moment, the fullness of his teaching. So hypothetically, if Mary's gospel is relating a practice that Christ taught her while the two of them were still corporal, while they both were physically present to each other. So then we can say that this was a preparation for the ultimate teaching, which would be when Christ crossed over and was no longer in physical form, and Mary is still able to perceive him. So how I interpret verse 9 is this lack of comprehension of the secret teachings that Mary's gospel contained, that Peter and the other disciple, the other male disciple, did not have and did not understand. They didn't have the practice in place to understand how to see Christ now, no longer in physical form. So then we get to verse 11, which again, if we were looking at this text just on its own, without the Gospel of Mary, without the Gospel of Philip, or any of the other Gospels that talk about the presence and prominence of women within the earliest form of Christianity, we might sort of see this as, well, Mary happened to be at the right place at the right time, or Mary was, she had anointed Christ, so she just wanted to be able to be a part of then the burial of his body once he was crucified. There's ways that we can sort of diminish her presence at the empty tomb. But when we have these texts reintegrated into the Christian story, we understand that just by the fact that Mary is the one who is present there at the empty tomb, that alone speaks volumes of her prominence. She is there because she is the one who can receive Christ. Mary is there because she is the one who has been taught by Christ to be able to perceive him. This is a moment that is often entirely overlooked or diminished, especially on Easter. Her feast day, which we just moved through on the 22nd, July 22nd, she has now been rehabilitated officially by the Catholic Church as the apostle to the apostles because of this moment that she receives the vision of Christ. She's the first to witness Christ after the crucifixion. She is the first to witness Christ's resurrection. However, for me, after having reintegrated the texts that we've studied in this course, What Mary Knew by Heart, we see that Mary uniquely was given teachings to allow her to be the witness, to be able to be the one who can see Christ from within her, and then continue the teachings of what it means to be human, which is ultimately then being able to reach a state where we are effectively in this treasure of the heart, and we are a bridge between the worlds, because we are receiving from not just the wisdom that our own soul has to give us, but then also the wisdom that those teachers, those angels, those ancestors who want to continue the work of love and to continue to be in service of love through us and through our lifetime. We are connected to all of them from within. So that that fact alone, that Mary is the one to receive him, is far more significant and powerful than we've ever given it credit for. And one of the most powerful aspects of the following verses after verse 11, when we begin to hear just about Mary and her grief. She is weeping. She is refusing to leave. Again, she wants to find his human form. So, she's in the fullness of her humanity. And what I have always found so beautiful and so revealing for all of us about this passage is that it is when Mary's at her most human that she can see the angels. She is crying and she's weeping and she's desperately wanting to be with Christ physically. So she's in the depths of her humanity, and this is when she can perceive two angels standing where Christ's body had been. That, to me, again, is this emphasis of the either or, of the, instead of moving out of that construct of one or the other, divine or human, this is another example of how profound it is to have the both and, where she is in the fullness of her humanity and also the fullness of her divinity. So she sees these two angels and they ask her, "Why are you weeping?" Which is powerful, mostly because that then is the exact same question that Christ asks her. And again, when I came across this for the first time, I felt like there is a message in that mirroring in that repetition of what the angels ask Mary and what Christ asks Mary. Why are you weeping? They both ask her that. And for that emphasis to be on, for that emphasis to help us understand the power of how important it is to be fully human, right? So there's nothing wrong. There's nothing, she is completely and entirely in grief. She is in the fullness of her humanity, and she's meant to be, and it is only from that state of being fully human, fully in her heart, that she then perceives the angels and Christ. So there's this same aperture, the same spiritual eye of the heart, the new, that allows her to perceive the angels, is the same that allows her to see Christ. And this, to me, has also always made me feel as though what she's perceiving isn't the same as corporal vision, of if one of your family members walks in the door, that she's perceiving Christ with the spiritual eye of the heart, meaning she's perceiving it from a vision that she's acquired from within her. This isn't the same as Christ being in his physical body, but it is a vision that is the same in terms of her capacity to perceive the angels and to perceive Christ. So, and we know at first she doesn't recognize Christ. She thinks he's the gardener. And so, she, which I've always felt is also moving, she asks, tell me where you have laid him, and she offers that she will go and get his body herself, which I've always found incredibly moving. And then it's when Mary hears her name in Christ's voice that she finally recognizes him. That's also, for me, another clue or another indication in terms of how I read this scripture, that, you know, he didn't look exactly as he did before he died, because at first she didn't recognize him. She could perceive him, but she didn't know yet that it was him. It was only once he said her name, Mary, that then she knew it was Christ. And I also find it significant that she exclaims Rabboni. She says teacher with exclamation point when she realizes it's him. To me, in that moment, it's significant. She doesn't say savior. She doesn't say master. She says teacher. And again, if we reintegrate, if we think of Mary's gospel as the practice, as the preparation, as the roadmap to how Mary was able to perceive Christ, then the resurrection is the final, is her attaining the master status, her PhD, in this form of seeing from the heart. And so her saying teacher, to me, is a nod towards what he uniquely taught her, what he had been teaching her all along, preparing her all along for this moment, to be the apostle to the apostles, to be the witness, the one who could see him and not leave him, not be convinced by the disappearance of his physical form, right? She was a love that remained. She was a love that waited in the dark, waited in the uncertainty. She refused to leave, and she demanded to see his physical form. And what she then was able to perceive, I believe, is the aspect of him, the aspect of the soul that survives the physical and egoic death when we die. I believe she saw that aspect of Christ, and it's why she couldn't originally see him, and it's why there's that mirrored "why are you weeping?" From both the angels and Christ, because in a way, Christ is an angelic form, and this is the way that Mary is perceiving him. So that is my interpretation of the Gospel of John and the risen life. I think that perception of Mary as the one who Christ chose to witness him, the one that was then meant to teach and reveal to all of us this form of vision that bridges this individual lifetime, my unique human physical form and the experiences, the wisdom of those ancestors who have come before me, or those in the angelic realm meant to inspire me and guide me. This is a form of being fully human in this world, in this lifetime, that I believe Mary then was meant to teach all of us. And as we all know, by the 4th and 5th century, her gospel will have been largely destroyed. But we have at least 3 fragments of her gospel that were buried and preserved. And they surfaced gratefully quite recently. And now we have this wisdom to be able to integrate it ourselves and put into practice ourselves, so that when we get into those isolated and disconnected states where we believe we are alone, where we are in the dark, we are in the unknown, and there's that sense of death. We have this capacity then to go inward and to practice cultivating this vision of what we can know by the heart. So for our soul voice meditation today, what I want us to ask when we go inward is related to Mary 7:4, where Christ says, "For where the mind is, where the spiritual eye of the heart is, there is the treasure." So if the heart is this treasure that Christ is referring to, then how do we then go inward, and how do we allow that treasure to function like a bridge between the worlds? I like to refer to Christ and Mary and their relationship as a love that never ends, and that to suggest that they had walkie-talkie hearts, both when they were embodied and then once Christ had gone through death and resurrected to Mary, that they could communicate with each other from within their hearts. And what I want us to do is to use this phenomenal opportunity of us all gathering together around this material and for this purpose of being in service to love, to ask the question, what message is meant for me here in this treasure, this mystical space called heart? So I want you to open up to the idea, open up to imagining that there may be a message waiting for you from a loved one. For example, I have a very strong connection to my grandfather who died of cancer when he was only 60. And he's someone who has absolutely guided and inspired me, and I have remained deeply connected to throughout my adult life. So maybe it's a loved one, an ancestor of yours that has a message for you. Maybe it's for those of you who believe in the angelic realm or believe in the idea that an angel is a culmination of a frequency that sort of shifts you from out of a limiting belief about yourself or something that has had you trapped in the past. Maybe there's a message that will help you heal something that you're ready to heal. Or maybe it's a message from a beloved teacher that you are aware of or conscious of in your meditation practice. So what I want us to do is practice this state of humility, which we enter into when we enter the heart, a state of humility where we're able to open up and to receive. It's very courageous to be receptive. The feminine has always been made out to be weak and more vulnerable. Being vulnerable, being receptive is some of the most courageous acts of love we can ever demonstrate, ever practice, is being humble enough to receive wisdom from within us. So let's get comfortable wherever you are. Let's, you can lie down, just shift in your body in a way where you're able to feel comfortable in your own skin, and you begin to come fully into this moment. A mantra that I like to repeat, an intention that I like to repeat is, I call myself back from all times and all places. I call myself back from all times and all places. That was a comment that came to me when I was reading the Acts of Paul and Thecla. Thekla is so incredibly powerful. And then allow yourself to imagine a golden light, whichever light is most healing for you, whichever color, or whatever comes to you. Your imagination is your own guide. What I always see when I close my eyes is an egg, because that's my destiny. That's written into my name. I see the Vesica Pisces, which is that egg shape, that oval shape, the sacred geometry of the overlapping of all opposites, of the divine feminine, the divine masculine. It's that shape that often Christ is standing in, from the crown of his head to the soles of his feet. Just imagine a golden light, whichever light appears to you as you close your eyes and settle into this beloved body. For me, it's a honey golden warmth. And I allow it to not only move over the surface of my skin, but then also to move through the inside of my body, through my mind. And like honey, sort of picking up in a sticky way any thoughts that aren't serving me in this moment, or that are distracting me from being able to be in this present moment. So allowing it to move through, and then also coat any stiffness that's distracting me, any chronic pain in my lower back, my hip. Just allowing the light to move through the surface and also deep from within. Slowly coating my entire being, from the crown of my head to the soles of my feet. And then I just picture that honey-like substance flowing out the soles of my feet, just clearing the inner space. So that I can begin to just be here fully. Nowhere else but here. So let's take our first intentional breath together. And acknowledge the importance of not just studying these works and using words and the mind, but also the importance, equal importance, both and, of returning to the heart, of being embodied, of being in this particular, unique, once in a lifetime body that we have each been given. When you feel a sense of reaching beneath the egoic thoughts, when you feel a sense of hitting a depth within you, maybe a sense of calm or stillness, and I want us to take a second intentional breath together. And this is the breath then that merges us with what I refer to as soul, but you may identify it as simply the self that never changes, or as the truth of who you are. Some of us just see it as a flame. No name and no words surrounding it, just as this flame. When you feel that sense of union, let's ask this question together. What message is meant for me here in this mystical space called heart, this treasure that we each contain and can return to, according to Mary's gospel? The treasure that Christ's name as being within each one of us and as connecting us to all of those who have been before us. So, what message is meant for me if I am here in this treasure, in this mystical space called heart, a witness standing between the worlds? What message is meant for me? I'll hold us inward for several minutes. Let's begin to give gratitude. When you feel able and ready, just take your third intentional breath. Just open your eyes. My heart is beating out of control right now. I when my grandfather was alive, we used to always look for four-leaf clovers together. That's a memory that I have just seared into my heart. Was that experience every time I'd go over to his house, we would look for four-leaf clovers. So that's how my meditation started, with us in his front yard, looking through all of the clover for a four-leaf clover. And he just looked up and said, "Your life is about to radically change." And then my heart started beating just absolutely out of control. And there's that feeling. Many of you I know have had, especially in the House of Mary Magdalene, we've talked about during meditation times where it's different than a dream. It feels like a visitation, or it feels like the same sensation as we felt when we were with that person when they were alive, and that's the feeling that I had as well, is this sense of visitation, and his actual presence being with me again. So for those of you who want to share, please do. You can share in the chat, and you can begin to ask questions in the Q&A, because we're going to move into that portion of the session. Also know that I am able to read the entire transcript of the chat. Emily sends that to me after. So just know that any message that you leave, any question, any comment, I'll be able to read after the session. And I want to first address some of the questions that came in over the past couple weeks, especially repetition of some questions that we had come in from our community. So one of them is about this phenomenal icon of Mary Magdalene that's on the cover of the Gospel of Mary of Magdala, translated by Karen King. This is an icon that I've written about in all of my books, actually, but first in Reveal, because this is the icon that was at the Catholic Charities where I worked in San Francisco with pregnant teens, and was where I really received a strong sense of a calling to return to graduate school in order to ultimately find out what happened to Mary's story. And many have been asking about the details of this iconography. So there is an iconographer named Robert Lentz, and he created this icon of Mary, as well as many, many others that are so absolutely stunning and powerful. So you spell his last name Lentz, Lentz, and just Google him online, and you can get prints and prayer cards of this version of Mary, as well as other incredible icons of other female saints throughout Christianity. So then there was also this emphasis, as I mentioned, on how do we practice seeing with the eye of the heart. So how do we practice this kenotic path, which we know the first Christians were participating in and were practicing together? Kenotic meaning self-emptying love. How do we practice that without spiritual bypassing, right? So if we're releasing what the ego is going through, isn't that spiritual bypassing? So what I want to do is give a very concrete and personal example that will help. It's somewhat extreme example, but I feel like it'll really help us put this into practice, or put this into a context where we can see that it involves profound work, And it actually is the opposite of bypassing, because it demands that you not numb, deny, and try to like Tupperware your emotions. It requires that you actually go fully into them. So in a chapter titled Why I Am Proud to Be Part Impala in Mary Magdalene Revealed, I speak of this egoic story that I have had of myself and that I had repeated inside myself, most often unconsciously, but that finally, in doing this work and doing this meditation, the soul voice meditation for years, and also in having that ultimate intention, which I feel Mary inspires me to practice, which is to let my love reach where it has never been before. That culminated in a moment when I was able to finally become aware of a story that an egoic idea of myself as a failure. Because when I was sexually assaulted as a child, I froze. And, all throughout really the beginning of my young adulthood, I had heard of fight and flight, but there wasn't as much research and information about the freeze response, the playing dead. And it wasn't until I came across the trauma work of Peter Levine in Waking the Tiger. That was a book that I felt led and inspired to read when I was on the pilgrimage to Mary's cave, to Mary Magdalene's cave. And that to me was all interconnected. I read Waking the Tiger, and Peter Levine made very clear that actually there aren't two responses. There isn't just fight or flight. There's also the freeze response. And he goes into this incredible story about the impala who is being chased and then is attacked. And in that moment of being attacked, the impala actually goes through a physical, passing out, a death, where the impala freezes, and the prey then thinks the impala is dead. So in that moment, I think it was a leopard, is no longer in attack mode. The leopard thinks it's won. And so it brings the impala over by a tree and sort of lets its guard down because it thinks the impala is dead. And in that moment, the impala is able to shake off the freeze response and escape. So that response, that freeze response, saves the impala's life. Now, when I read that story, I, sobbed my face off, because I could see myself finally. I could see finally the way that I had been labeling myself as a failure for not having fought my attacker. And because it seemed the opposite of who I understood myself to be, which was an incredibly fiery little girl, very, very self-possessed and very opinionated and very passionate. And so I didn't recognize that response, and I judged it for years and years as a betrayal of my own self, as a failure, and that I hadn't saved myself in that moment. And that story, what happened for me was, and this is what I mean, this is an extreme example, but my ego died in that moment when I could finally see that I had I had been protecting myself. I had been freezing in order to wait until I felt it was safe, and then I could escape. And that created, I came back to life after having that, moving through that egoic death. And of course, it's not the complete death, the death of that egoic story about myself. I had no idea how much that story was keeping me in this unloving state, this feeling that I was somehow intrinsically unworthy of being met by love fully, or that I was really, it was this, the word failure was so loud inside of me because of that. And it was very much my secret that I had failed myself. It was so deep inside. It took years and years and years for me to finally fully see it for what it was, and to feel it, to feel what that was like, to think that I had betrayed myself, or to think that I had, failed in that moment. And then to allow, to release that, to release that belief about myself that the ego had created, to release it all, and to instead allow love to come up and hold all of it, hold all of it, all the years that I had storied myself as this failure and as unworthy of love, hold it all, and let love also reach to the depths of what created that limiting, that belief about myself. Just let love surround it all, and including and especially the knowing again that I had always innately, unconditionally been worthy of love. Another person wrote in and was wanting me to explain that idea of, I think I mentioned that love is a mercy that I don't deserve. And there was confusion around what that means, like that, well, how can we not deserve love? And what I mean by that phrase is that we don't deserve love in the sense that we have to earn it or prove that we're worthy of it, or do something that would mean that then we get to be loved. Because if that were true, then it would also be true that we can do something and then no longer be able to ever be loved again, right? So love is not conditional. That is what I meant by love is a mercy that I don't deserve. It means I don't have to work at earning it or proving that I'm worthy of it. It's graced, it's inherent, it's unconditional. And then there was a question about Mary, Mother of God, and this concept of Mary as the perpetual ever virgin, the immaculate virgin. And I just want to direct those who asked that question about the Virgin Mary, and when she became a virgin, which wasn't until the 5th century. I want to direct you to the Council of Ephesus. It's Ephesus, and it happened in 431 AD. So fascinating to study that council, because that was the council where that the dichotomy, which I write about in She Who Confirms the Truth. There's a chapter in Mary Magdalene Revealed that's about that either or, the virgin whore dichotomy that was created within the church, and very much created within the consciousness of so many women and females that struggle, even who aren't a part of Christianity. So you don't have to attend church to be indoctrinated into the misogyny of the church. So many of us who have never been card-carrying Christians have still suffered from the impact of that virgin whore split. And that really began to be codified within Christianity at the Council of Ephesus. So I highly suggest reading all you can find about that council, and then also the homily 33 by Pope Gregory the Great in the 6th century. That's also a phenomenal resource to look at and to see the way in which Mary then was rewritten as the penitent prostitute. So that's a very fascinating study. Then we had a lot of questions about the Omega Retreat, which is coming up in August 13th in Rhinebeck, and what to expect. It's a full weekend, so it's 4 sessions, and we'll be studying all of the texts. So not just the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, but also the Gospel of Thomas and the Acts of Paul and Thecla, and weaving in these practices of self-emptying love, of the kenotic path, but we'll be able to do it together in person, which just creates a completely different and powerful phenomenon to be able to be together. And there's also that capacity, which is my favorite, to be in dialogue with each other. And there's a lot of exchange then that's possible of our own wisdom, of what we each have arrived at by practicing this earliest form of Christianity, by going inward, by believing what we hear when we enter the heart. And so there's wisdom that we're able to share with each other that isn't as easily shared in this medium. And then also many were wondering about the House of Mary Magdalene, which is, we're going to open in September, and it's going to be an opportunity for us to be able to study these texts together and practice the soul voice meditation as a community, as a beloved community together, showing up twice a month from September until May. So let me get some of the other live questions. Okay, so there's this, there's a question about seeing from the eye of the heart and perceiving Christ in that moment that Mary is the first. There are other disciples then who witness Christ after Mary is the first to see him. And there's that great line later in the Gospel of John about seeing is believing, like blessed are those who do not see and yet believe. So which I felt like is again a nod to Mary, that she doesn't have to see it to believe it, she believes it and therefore she sees it. So, and then that practice for me is about shifting away from, like, so when the disciple and Peter do not perceive Christ, what I have imagined is they sort of walk right by him, or they're unable to even perceive him at all because they're expecting, they're operating on this level of where he would look the same as how he did before he died, or that he would be in, physical, the resurrection, like, is literal and is something that they would see outside of them. And so the shift for me that's happening in the Gospel of John is one that I really felt led to because of the Gospel of Mary. And it's that shift that instead of seeing what's outside of us, we are perceiving what's within us. So it's turning our attention and our vision inward rather than focusing on what's outside of us. It's turning inward to what's within us. And it's my deep belief that there are others, throughout the history of Christianity, like Pope Joan, like Joan of Arc, like Saint Teresa of Avila, like the French mystic Marguerite Porete. They write and speak very clearly about this same capacity to be able to see from the eye of the heart, to perceive. Rather than see something, it's visioning from within. And, for example, when Joan of Arc speaks of the angels who guided her through the 100 Years' War, she isn't referring to actual, physical angels that others could see as well. She's talking about something that she could perceive from within her, from a state she had entered because of her devotion. And that reception, that capacity to go inward and perceive, I think gets confused when we look at, paintings of Joan receiving the visitation of the Archangel Michael. She's usually on her knees or somehow very much below the angels, in the same way that any painting of Mary Magdalene seeing Christ resurrected, it's always her down on her knees and depicted as beneath or below Christ, just as Joan of Arc is below the angels. And the misunderstanding then that happens in those depictions is that we see then that we think the spiritual is above the human. And we think that, that is actually happening. Like that's what it looks like, is these trumpets and, the Archangel Michael in this luminous golden robe. And when that moment, when Joan of Arc was just 13 and, wanted to spin wool and just be a Parisian peasant, that moment happened within her. That moment happened because there wasn't a hierarchy between them. It happened within her heart. So it's a disservice to think that is, that the angels appear above and therefore beyond and are greater than us and our lowly human status. It often creates a misunderstanding that means we miss hearing angelic messages that are happening, because they're happening in the dark, in the quiet, from within. And they're happening in that humble, vulnerable state of just being receptive and just being still and silent and allowing our ego to lay down all of its ideas of what the message might be, or all of the ideas of who we might be or of what we need to do. It's just a releasing of the ego to allow that moment of the soul or an angel to be loud and present right here from within us. So there's another, there's a question, do you feel Mary also taught Jesus? Absolutely. Because again, the idea that Christ was really in a profound way, Christ began within the church that was formed in the 4th century, Christ replaced the emperor, Caesar. Like Christ became that, but the hierarchy remained within institutionalized religion. The hierarchy remained, so that there was Christ, and then the Pope, and all the male cardinals and bishops, and there was a modeling of the hierarchy, the structures of power that had existed within the Roman Empire were replicated in the hierarchy of the institution of the church. So, and Christ became the new emperor. However, before the 4th century, before Christianity was institutionalized, that was the exact thing that Christ was countering and was suggesting was not ultimate, that we do not and cannot rank existence according to a hierarchy, that in fact, every nature, every modeled form, every creature exists in and with each other. That's from Mary 2:2. That it's a radical unity, a unitive consciousness that binds us and that allows us to be able to be in concert with each other, in communion with each other, and also with all of those who have gone before us that still have wisdom to impart to us. So there was for me, the practice of these 1st century Christians was a practice of really recognizing the radical equality that capacity of being able to see with the eye of the heart then affords. Because if we each have direct access to our own soul and to this wisdom, not knowledge, because knowledge would become elite and knowledge would become, male mind, masculine, but wisdom, so what we can know, gnosis, from within, that is something that no one can ever keep us from. No one can ever commodify, and no one can ever charge us for. Wisdom is that realm of the infinite that we can enter from within us, and that we can know as a gnosis from direct experience. Okay, so there are a couple asking about that repetition of why are you weeping? And for me, why that's significant is because to me, it's pointing to a similarity between the state of the angels and the state of Christ. Why are you weeping? They're both in this state of a state of being where it's not embodied, it's not corporal, it's the same mode with which Mary is perceiving the angels is that same mode with which she's perceiving Christ. And so I've always found it significant that both the angels and Christ ask her that same question. And ultimately, I feel that they're asking her that question because they are evidence of the fact that there is an aspect of us that goes on, that does not die with the physical death, that does not die with the ego and the body in death. There is a part of us that goes on, and the angels and Christ are emphasizing that. Why are you weeping? Because love never ends. Why are you weeping? Because love is stronger than death. So why are you weeping? I'm right here. I'm before you. And why are you weeping? We are not just human. We are also divine. So there's that emphasis. Yes, and some were wondering about if the Acts of Paul and Thecla, which is one of the oldest Christian scriptures that we have attained. It's from 70 AD, the Acts of Paul and Thecla, and that is in a New Testament. I highly recommend reading that. And also Thunder Perfect Mind is in the New Testament. It's absolutely one of the most powerful especially to read it out loud, is incredibly powerful. Okay, and then there is another question about this. Let's see. There's this question about this. How do I handle and how do I manage the comments and the aggression that writing about this perspective of Mary Magdalene and writing about this earliest form of Christianity inevitably creates for those who are fundamentalist Christians or conservative Christians. For me, it's really important to practice everything I am teaching and reading about and studying. So that's the most important thing. Of course, sometimes it's triggering because often the comments get very personal. They're not just a general slam towards feminist theology or towards, a more inclusive vision of Christianity or of Christ. It usually goes somewhat personal. But those are the moments when I can put all of this into practice and, feel what I'm feeling, but anchor into my heart and be able to know how and if I should respond. And ultimately, it doesn't in any way affect or deter or it doesn't impact me in the sense that it makes me question or there's that sense of discernment of that's so clear to me at this point in my life, where love is love is love is love. And, when someone comes at me telling me that God, condemns or judges people for who they love, or, that there is no way women will ever be a part of, the highest positions of spiritual authority in this lifetime, and want to engage in that. For me, there's this, because of this practice, there's a sense of being able to discern when it's coming from a place of ego and a place of fear, which I can appreciate and understand why it feels threatening. But, and also it isn't to me, it doesn't resonate as the truth. So, the comments and the opinions of others, it's what in many ways all of this work prepares you for, because the truth isn't something that anyone has told you. The truth is what you have uncovered from within, and the truth is what you return to and experience directly within yourself. So something from that state of direct experience, from that state of gnosis. And for me, that presence of love is more real and more alive and just only ever more fully the truth for me. And so those comments and those criticisms, I'm able to see them then in that light, discern them as coming from that place of fear and ego. So then there was also a question about, we had several people write in asking if it was normal to just begin to cry while doing the 3 breaths or while practicing the soul voice meditation. You know, not necessarily seeing anything or hearing anything, but just being swept by an emotion. And that's absolutely a part of the practice. And I just want to share that when I started the soul voice meditation, when I was studying Hesychism in divinity school at Union, and practicing what they practiced, which is this state of theosis, or constant connection to the divine, of allowing all of your consciousness, all of your thoughts to move into the heart. And I would just be sitting in my tiny, tiny little room of 513 in it was the convent of Riverside Church, Riverside Cathedral. So I just sat in my little convent room, and I was at level with the stained glass of Riverside Cathedral right across the courtyard. So I would just sit there and try to practice what I believed these ancient Christian contemplatives practice by going inward to the heart. And all I could ever do once I felt like I reached there was just ugly cry. I just, every single time, it was this feeling of like this presence. And for me, it's so often embodied in my grandfather, because he was such an embodiment of love for me, unconditional love for me. But it was this feeling of this presence suddenly in the room with me that forgave everything, that witnessed me, saw me completely, all of, you know, the ego's hot mess of me, and all of the devotion and love that I am, and saw it all and accepted it all and received it all and loved it all and held it all, you know, without judgment. And so each time I practiced what eventually became the soul voice meditation, which is essentially just a more embodied form of meditation that the ancient contemplatives called the hesychist were practicing, all I did was cry. And it was like chipping away at all this scaffolding that I had built around my idea of myself and my idea of my life and what I needed to do, and who I needed to be. It was just that crying was chipping away at that, and just releasing all of that. And so that's all I did, was weep. So yes, it's absolutely not only normal, but encouraged. And I would say the 3 most prominent forms of seeing with the spiritual eye of the heart is just that emotional, just allowing yourself, you ask a question, and then you have an emotional response. Like, so not necessarily trying to understand it with words or a story, just allowing yourself to feel what's there for that meets you when you enter the heart. Just meeting that emotion and allowing it to wash through you, just feeling it all. So there's the emotional answer, just comes with feeling all of it and just allowing all of it to be okay, you know, to just receive it with non-judgment. And then there's the auditory, which of course isn't hearing something like on a loudspeaker, a target. It's hearing from within. So it's hearing in a voice that is from within the silence. And it's that, I like to refer to it as the voice that knows itself completely. So it's not the voice of like a used car salesman that's trying to convince us of something, or has a limited amount of time in order to change, our perception. It's a voice that is indelibly calm, and it's a voice that is not rushed. It's very dulcet and not demanding. So, and that's what I refer to as the soul voice. And that for me is usually the most prominent that I meet with, in terms of seeing with the eye of the heart, is the soul voice. But then there's also vision, actually seeing like a scene play out, like entering a dream space and seeing a scene play out maybe from our past or something happening in the future. And it in a way then is answering the question that we had asked in the heart, or sometimes it's a symbol, and sometimes it's, we need to ask further questions about what a symbol or what an image or what a scene means in relation to the question that we have asked. So it's always important to keep interviewing, like to have an inner Oprah and just keep interviewing the soul, in the sense that if there's something that confuses you when you go inward with a question, just keep asking, what does that mean? Or show me, let me receive that same answer in another form. So those are the three forms that most often appear in terms of the seeing with the eye of the heart and what we can know by heart. So we are at the end of our third and final session. And again, I will read through the transcript of the chat, and we will be sending out an email that contains all three links to all three sessions. So you have them to watch when you're able to, and if you want to revisit them, as well as information about Omega next month in Rhinebeck, New York, and also the House of Mary Magdalene, which opens in September. I want to close with an intention for all of us whenever we are watching this, whenever we practice all that we have learned, whenever we put it into practice. I want to set the intention of what this red thread means to me. This red thread connects me to each and every one of you, connects me to that intention to let love reach where it has never been before. And it connects me to the memory of Mary Magdalene, her prominence, her teaching, her companionship with Christ. It connects me to the reality that each and every one of us is a part of a beloved community, where when I pray for myself, when I meditate on love, I am also deeply and intrinsically connected to each one of you. And I want you to, if you feel moved, just get a red thread. You can just wrap a red string around your wrist, or you can get a red bracelet, to remind you that you're not alone, and to remind you to practice the three breaths when you become aware, when you awake and become aware that you are in one of the seven powers of the ego. And without shame, without judgment, just return to the heart in order to feel fully what it is that has come up for you as a human being, which you are meant to be, and then to allow, when you're able, for that great big unsayable love to overwhelm you and for your soul to rise from within you. I'm sending us love to all 30 countries around the world. I am sending so much love to this beloved community. I am so grateful for this opportunity for us to study and to learn and to love only evermore. Thank you.